Good morning. Welcome to Beyond the Binary on WDBX 91.1 FM, Southern Illinois. This is Benny. You can find us at facebook.com/Beyond the Binary or email us at bthebradio@gmail.com. Today, I'm joined with a wonderful co-host. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Shahan Bellamy. I am with the Department of Cinema and Photography. I'm a student with the department here at SIUC. And I'm really excited to be here.
Yes. I'm really happy to have Shahan here while Ari is off enjoying herself at Burning Man while we are burning here in Southern Illinois.
It's super hot.
Super hot, really humid. At the very least, Ari gets the dry heat that I miss from the West Coast and in the desert area. But anyhow, we have a few stories here that we want to get to. The two largest, of course, over the week that I'm sure most of you are aware of deal with Chelsea Manning, as well as it's connected tangentially so, but also the Palm Center that I talked about last week and kind of military infrastructure. This current shift to we need to include as many people in the U.S. military system as possible, and Chelsea Manning is one of those bodies. So, but before we get there, I'd like to actually open up, as we traditionally do, which is with an interview, and have just invite you, Shahan, to kind of tell us about your project, what you're doing in general. Yeah.
All right. So again, just thank you for letting me be here. Like I said, I'm with SIUC, the Department of Cinema. And so I'm a McNair Scholar, so what that allows me to do is work with a faculty member on a research project of my interest. I've been working with the great Dr. Angela Aguayo. And what we did over the summer was look at documentary representation of trans and gender variant individuals. So the title of the project was Either Other, a contextual analysis of gender fluidity in documentary film over the last 25 years. And in total, we looked at 8 films ranging from 1990 to 2012. And as I said, we looked at documentary film just because often with that genre, it has a validity to it that we don't necessarily give to fictional film. So audiences come into it with the assumption that they're going to be enlightened, they're going to be taught something, they're going to learn something that they didn't know before. And queer film in general has this burden because Ruby Rich put it best when she said that it has this burden to not only educate the masses, but it also affirms identity to the queer community. And so I really wanted to look at these films and what they say, not only to the queer community, but like the greater whole. And so looking at these 8 films, I noticed major themes. So there's this fixation on body. So all of these films, which I'm sure you've known watching multiple queer films,
oh yes.
Yeah, there's just like this fixation on body, right? So the audience is always well aware that the physical aspects of the character might not align with the gender representation. So we're given like that money shot. We see the FTM who binds, or the Packer, or something to that extent. Secondly, I noticed this class and economic structure. So we had talked about this previously. One of the films that I watched was the Transgeneration series that aired on Sundance, and you have one character who receives $16,000 from her parents to get gender reassignment surgery.
Wait, how much was that?
It's $16,000. And then you have another character who's literally shown peddling the streets, the black market, trying to get hormones. So you see the second character's her status as a immigrant intersects with her, economic displacement. And then you have this notion of formation of family. So in all the films, like all the characters are disowned by their family, and then they form their own family, which I think a lot of people in the queer community have similar experiences. So they have some type of rejection from outer society.
Absolutely.
So there's this notion I'm going to, form my own support group, which is totally valid. And then there's this obligation of transition, right? This obligation that in order to be transgender, you have to physically alter your body, and what that says to a greater whole of the community. And then from that, there's a theory that we've been calling the dynamic performance of gender. Maybe we can come up with something catchier before I leave today. But that's kind of what we've been rolling with. And it really talks about, as individuals, our gender is a performance that we consciously and continuously put on based on societal's expectations of us. And what that means in terms of assimilation. So assimilating into white middle-class society on economic standards, or with the formation of family, those hegemonic traditional mother and father roles, or assimilation into the masculine and the feminine, right? So when these characters are told that they have to transition physically, what does that say to the gender binary system? So are we encouraging individuals to go outside of that, or are we really just reinforcing it because characters don't go outside of it, but instead they just pick a different category to reside in? So,
right. Can I ask?
Yeah, of course.
I have, tons of stuff that you're saying here that I really like, and I have two questions that are kind of connected here, and one of them is kind of, you're kind of hinting at this, I think, in interesting ways, about how your observations, these themes that you've been hashing out of the films that you've looked at, how other identity vectors, including class, race, sounds like those are the specific two that you've really hashed out, how those play out in these films too. So it's never just about genders, which is, I think, interesting about the dynamic performance of gender. But
Right. So the transgender community is diverse, just like any other community, and no, right? There's diversity. So we have to look at all of those other subcategories.
Yeah, sure. We
would be limiting these characters if we didn't touch on the other things that impact their lives. And if you don't have money for food, necessary being transgender, Like if a character is going through something like that, as a filmmaker, is a subject that can't be ignored. Which kind of brings me to, you touched on like the broader implications, right? So there's this continued miseducation surrounding this community, and that's another reason that I really wanted to look at these films, because mass media teaches us everything we know about behavior, interactions with other people, our roles.
Increasingly.
Yeah. So what these films do, in a way, they turn a marginalized group even more marginalized, right? So trans people, gender variant people, gender queer people are the marginalized of the marginalized. And what that says, and the activism that we can take, like this next step forward from there.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, I'm getting some live tweets right now.
Gotcha.
Folks who are saying that you seem cool.
Thanks. I think I'm cool.
I think so too, from our interactions. So I'm wondering, on a more personal level for yourself, I'm interested in, or I'm wondering if you're comfortable speaking a little bit about, how do I say it, your own reading of these films. So it still sounds very clinical to me. It's very much like I'm observing something. And I'm wondering how you have interacted with these films, what brought you to study these films, even this project in general. Particularly as a mode of kind of, well, frankly, why are you doing this work? Like, what's the reason for this?
Yeah. So, you said it kind of sounds clinical. So, like, there's, not saying I have split personalities, but there's parts of me that very much so does look at it in a clinical way.
Sure.
Someone in academia that looks, okay, I'm going about this in certain research methods. But more importantly, what's so great about the work is that it requires me to look at my own place within this community, and look at my own actions and the decisions that I make. So a part of it is documentary. That's just what I love, right? So that's the simple basis. But as a member, I consider myself a member of the LGBT community, as someone who, majority of the time, identifies as trans. What's being put out about me, and more specifically, what's being put out about me as a black person of this community. So I think majority of people, you would find that their research some way, somehow deals with something that's personal. That's what we're most passionate about. That's what affects us.
Yeah, and I think that unfortunately, absolutely, and I think that unfortunately the impetus is put on those bodies like your own, like my own, like other people from all kinds of marginal locations, that for us it looks more personal than maybe I'm studying this thing out here, right? Because of the kind of work that we're engaging in. And what are your thoughts on non-trans people doing this work?
I have this debate that with fellow students and professors, and even like an internal debate. A part of me has this idea that for some things, if you're not a part of that community, I just feel like you shouldn't talk about. Not necessarily talk about, but maybe your voice. I don't know. I'm hesitant to certain things, but I just feel like unless you're a black person in America, you'll never really know what it's like to be black, right?
Absolutely.
And the same thing can be said with the trans community. So if you've never firsthand experienced discrimination or anxiety of what it's like to go get your driver's license renewed, or something so simple that most people don't even think about.
Absolutely.
You know, instances you're in Walmart and you want to buy, you know, some drinks, and they go to ID you, and the conversation you have to have with the cashier that you don't even know about why your ID doesn't look like, you know what I mean? Simple things like that. So if you yourself haven't experienced it, then there's a level to it that, not saying you can't do the work effectively, but there's something to be said when it hits home, the amount of effort you put into it.
Yeah. And I think that at the very least, it asks that there are a slew of very specific types of questions that maybe you need to ask yourself as that researcher, what we might call reflexivity, or really kind of considering your positionality and what it is that you're studying. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I was just kind of going to piggyback on that. So, like, our subjectivity obviously comes into play, and some people might not like that in the realm of research, but I think it adds a layer. It guarantees that I'm not going to lose interest in what I'm doing. I'm passionate about what I'm doing. It's going to affect me in the long run. And I think that's what's brilliant about not only just the university setting, but research. So if you, quote unquote, do it right, it changes you as a person, not just, you know, as someone who's doing research. And what's so great is, as someone who considers themselves a filmmaker, a media maker, now that I've looked at these themes that I've noticed and some of the things that I dislike. So one of the things that we really looked at was this idea of progression versus volume. So it's great that the amount of works that feature transgender people has increased.
Yeah.
But the types of representations haven't necessarily changed. So what's the point if we have a bunch of the same stuff? You know what I mean? So now I'm in the next phase of my research, which is actually producing a piece myself, where I'm hoping to kind of go against, maybe buck the traditional tropes that we've seen in all these other films that I've watched in the last 30 years.
Yeah. That's a huge undertaking.
Yeah,
I imagine the pressure's got to be quite hard.
I feel it, like, right on my left shoulder.
And I think particularly around kind of, I don't know, I feel like part of that pressure is, I imagine that if I were in this position, I would be up every single night wondering, am I reifying the system that I'm trying to change, or am I changing it by reifying it? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that a part of me has to just say, I can do my best, but I am very conscious of the fact that I'm taking on this work. And by default, right, so there's not a lot of works that feature trans individuals, right? So because there's not a lot of works that feature trans individuals anyway, by default, this piece will speak for the trans community, even if that's not my intention, right? So it's just like, it's like Barack Obama automatically speaks for all black people, right? And even though he doesn't, but it's kind of that undertaking. So
that's that really weird. I get frustrated just at that logic, the way that tends to kind of function. And interestingly, the medium of, I would imagine, a documentary, which unquestionably sometimes comes as the source of knowledge, or a more valid source of knowledge, versus a Hollywood film like Trans America, for instance, where all of a sudden it's a documentary.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons that we really wanted to look at documentary. A lot of people have asked, why not look at traditional, representations such as the L Word with the character Max, or something like Trans America. And it's for that simple reason. Audiences come to documentary and they automatically give it more validity than they do other pieces. And for that reason, the representations that come out of documentary must be that much more accurate, right? So they must have they carry the burden of changing the world even if they don't want to, because just of the genre that they're in.
Can you tell us a little bit about your theory of dynamic performance of gender?
Yeah, so basically what the theory says is, it's kind of building off of Judith Butler, which I'm sure a lot of people might be aware of her. Yeah, and Simone de Beauvoir. I always have to slow down and pronounce her name correctly. It kind of builds off their theory. So what Judith Butler states is that it is the repetitive, conscious notion of our performing gender that forms gender itself, right? And I take that one step further and state that it is that performance and our interactions with others that really defines what our gender is. So as we get affirmation or rejection from others, we alter our gender performance. An example I often use is that of the tomboy who's a little girl, and her mother sits her down and tells her, getting dirty, it's not really ladylike, you shouldn't do that. And from there on out, the young lady alters her gender performance for affirmation from those around her.
Sure.
And you can kind of do that with any sexuality, any race. One of the major films I watched was Juggling Gender, which features Jennifer Miller, who identifies as a bearded lesbian. She naturally grows a beard without hormones. And she notes that, yeah, right? And it's thick, man. Like, I'm trying to get there, and she's already there. I'm really jealous. But she notes that she doesn't know how to perform as a bearded lesbian, but instead she performs how others would like her to, because that's where she gets affirmation. And I think a lot of us do that in our day-to-day life.
Sure.
Even if we don't realize it. You can look at masculinity, or what's the definition of what feminine means, right? So
Sure.
Women have to groom themselves, and this pageantry that goes into it. It's like almost like a theater performance at the end of the day.
It's interesting. I mean, part of my mind is going in multiple spaces. So with good old Judy Butler, at least, like part of her notion of that performativity is also kind of the policing mechanisms, the way that I applaud, or I say, "Wow, you've lost some weight," or
Right.
"Wow, your hair looks different," or these subtle kind of ways that we police each other. And we don't necessarily intentionally. It's the unintentional policing.
Right.
It's the "you look great today," and I'm wondering how her notion, with your notion of the dynamic performance of gender, I'm wondering if this can also be applied to non-trans identities, so that the pressure isn't always on trans bodies as being the study.
I think so. And I think that's what's great about it, is that you can take it out of the context of trans or LGBT, and you can apply it, no matter the person's background. Like you said, I mean, you can take the, I guess, quote-unquote heterosexual masculine man, right? What it means, brave, stoic, John Wayne, right? So that's not really what a man is, but that's this societal perception of what manhood is, and that's what we're continuously taught in the media to aspire to. And then bringing it back to the trans element, when individuals, and I'm of course not speaking for the entire trans community or every trans experience, but when trans individuals begin physical transition, you often see them perform hyper-masculinity or hyper feminine behavior, almost in an attempt to overcompensate for the fact that maybe their physical attributes don't align with their gender expression.
Yeah, and I think that that's completely valid, given the way that performativity works. That in some capacity you have to kind of make a leap, right? And part of that leap is trying to convince people. It's trying to identify with outsiders or other bodies to say, no, I am this thing that I'm trying to perform as. See me this way.
And it's so interactive. I was talking to someone the other day, and I have a male friend who we've gotten closer recently, just over the last couple months. And I was talking to my other friend, and I said, I've learned so much of how I'm supposed to behave, right? And what's so great about this theory is that it's aware that this is something that's constantly changing depending on our environment. So what it means to be masculine in the black community for men might be different from what it means to be masculine in the Asian community. And I made note of the fact that now hanging out with this other African American male, I've noticed my own behaviors changing. And I think what's cool is the fact that I'm aware that they're changing, and now it's my decision, will I continue to behave this way, or will I do something different? And that's really where the potential to revolutionize the world comes, when we're aware that we're performing this way, and then whether we choose to keep giving into it or not.
Right. Can you speak a little bit about your current new project?
Let
us know what's going on.
Yeah, so I'm super excited. So the second stage, like I was saying, after completing kind of more of the traditional research elements of it, I'm in the process of doing a documentary, kind of the beginning pre-production stages. And what the film does is it's multi-layered. So I'll have one individual who does not identify as male or female, as genderqueer. And so I'm really interested to see how a person lives post-gender in a world that's fixated on gender, right? So before we're even born, we're already putting these projections and expectations on this fetus that hasn't even come out, right? So you have those parents who are expecting, like, oh, it's a boy or a girl, let me paint everything blue or pink, and we're already, placing expectations on them. So how does a person go outside of that? Truly, how do you live outside of the gender binary? I think a lot of us would like to, but I don't think as a society we're there. So telling their story and how they, live in the academic realm here in the Midwest, Southern Illinois, as well as just being honest about my own exploration, my own position in this community. Where do I stand? How do I learn this from others? The decisions I make in my life. And I kind of take this opportunity to do like a big call to individuals. So if anybody is genderqueer or transgender or just gender variant, think that they have a great experience, maybe like a partner of someone who's trans, I'd really be interested to talk to them about their experiences. And this performance of gender is not exclusive to the trans community. So even someone who might not identify or consider themselves a member of the LGBTQ community, their story is just as valid, and I'm interested to talk to them. And I guess I should give them my email so they can reach me at...
There's that.
Yeah, right? So how do they get in contact? My email is Shahan, SHAHAN .Bellamy, BELLAM, as in man, Y, at SIU.edu. And so I'm just really excited to hear other people's experiences and stories, because in reality I'm just a baby in this movement, right? So considering not only when I was born, but how long I myself have been transitioning, there's still a lot I have to learn. So that's what this next part, and more importantly, it's an opportunity to, like I said, it's an opportunity to go against all those things that I found so problematic in the other films, and give a voice to that group that's left out. So there's really not a whole lot in terms of trans people who don't physically alter their bodies, right?
Sure.
So give them their opportunity. Before air, we were talking about you can't be something that you can't see, because we learn everything from media. So, how do we become a society that's accepting of people if we don't even know they exist? And that seems so foreign to you and I, because we consider ourselves open-minded people, and we acknowledge that there's such diversity. There are people who literally just don't, pure ignorance in the form of ignorance, just do not know that these problems are going on. So I feel like as media makers and as activists and people part of this community, it's our job to go out there and let them know that this is going on.
I completely agree. I mean, that's why I do the work that I do, particularly in all kinds of media channels, whatever I have access to, at least. And at least I can speak for myself here. I'm excited for you to change media representation, Shahan. I think that I'm looking forward to that myself as a producer of media and as a consumer, big-time consumer of media. I think that it's very important. And for our audience out there, I will also post Shahan's email address on our Facebook, which is at facebook.com/Beyond the Binary. I'll make sure to post that later this afternoon. Hopefully get you in contact with folks around the region. Are you looking for local folks specifically?
I mean, just for the sake of convenience of space, that'd be great. But I'm fortunate enough that I do have a small budget to work with. I am running off a grant from SIU, which is really nice to be a part of. So I do have some wiggle room to travel around and talk to different people. I think it really would be interesting to talk about what is it like in Southern Illinois, right? So for us that live in Carbondale, we get the diversity of the campus, but me, myself, I'm from Marion, so if anyone's familiar with this region, 20 minutes east of here, it's very homogenous. It's very white, middle-class society. So I'd be interested to see how people live in those realms outside of the diversity of Carbondale and SIU. Their stories are the ones that I feel like really need to be told. How do they deal with discrimination on a daily basis? Anybody, I feel like everyone has a voice, and sometimes people just need to have someone to listen to them, and I'm willing to be that person. So
Sure.
Yeah.
I like that. It's interesting when you talk about also the diversity between Carbondale and Marion, where I come from, Los Angeles County, where at least for me the diversity is very different. There's the urban-rural stereotypes, right? That the city has all the answers, and I don't necessarily buy into that per se. I tend to use this example over and over again that back in the city, sure, you don't have as explicit kind of hate, but that's because the explicit kind of hate comes in the form of anonymity. So a car that drives by and tosses a Coke can or a beer bottle at my head,
right,
I'm not going to see them again in my life more than likely, let alone not know them. Here, I'm probably going to run into you again, so it tends to check people's performances of hate sometimes, right? Not all the time. But it means that if you're going to say something, I'll probably run into you again at Panera or at Best Buy, and I'll say, "Oh, it was you.
Right.
Let's have some more words." So it's very interesting. This, I guess levels of diversity, levels of experience, rural versus urban. I'm very interested in rural-urban kind of experiences, or at least trying to debunk that myth.
Yeah, I mean, I always find it interesting when people like yourself come from somewhere. Such as California or something, and it blows my mind how you all could, I guess, quote unquote, survive here because it's so different.
It's just different, though.
Yeah,
like it's just trying to acclimate to a different type of way of being. I mean, when we talk about when my partner and I first got here two years ago, my partner, she needed rainbow flags around her. She just wasn't, she was like, I don't get this. This makes no sense. But that's because that's where we come from, right? And so part of, you even talked about it earlier, is kind of that notion of how you create those families of choice, right? And even for me back in the larger city, my own family of choice was a created queer community that I crafted myself because I wasn't getting it out of the larger kind of pride spaces, if you will. It just didn't include bodies or experiences like my own. None really do. And so the same thing happened here. It was trying to find a network of queer folks that I could kind of connect with in the way that I needed to connect with, that could validate me in the way that I needed to be validated.
I think that experience is similar to a lot of people.
Sure.
In all 8 films that I watched, that was something that I found. Each characters or multiple characters, even if there necessarily wasn't an outright rejection from biological family, kind of like what I was going back to, unless you're a part of that community and you've had those shared experiences, there's something to be said about that, and there's something to be said about the camaraderie that's formed with people who quote-unquote just get you.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what's so brilliant about the formation of family. And those are one of the things that I want to continue to explore in my own work as I go on this next step of the research.
Sure. Well, we're at the halfway point, so we're going to take a quick break, play some quote commercials, some underwriting, some support for our show, and we'll be right back with our news stories. All right. Welcome back to Beyond the Binary on WDBX 91.1 FM, community radio for Southern Illinois. You can find us on Facebook.com/Beyond the Binary or email us at bthebradio@gmail.com. Today, I, Benny, am joined by filmmaker Shahan, who is here, just recently talked about all of the wonderful work that he's doing with trans representation. And I don't want to stop it there. I want to say trans, as well as so gender and class and racial representations across the board.
All these categories intersect with each other, so it's important to look at all of them.
Yeah. Mind blowing. All right, so we have a few news items to get to today. The larger discourse is going to be, of course, about Chelsea Manning. So our first story comes out of Harlem in New York, and this is part of an ongoing discourse that we have on the show about cycles of violence, that violence against marginal bodies, in general, are part of larger systemic practices. This is never about the individual, though we want to pay respects to the individual who is a victim of systemic violence. And what we have here is a trans woman, Islan Nettles. I believe that's how she says her name, Islan Nettles, who was attacked by unfortunately, a 20-year-old man. She was with a group of trans women in Harlem. A group of men were yelling things at these women. They'd realized that they were transgender, and this one young man started attacking them. And unfortunately, the attack led to brain damage. Now, part of the issue that I have with this, as ongoing kind of critiques work, when we talk about the individual versus the systemic, we now have a 20-year-old black man who's now going to be in prison for who knows how long.
Right.
Does this teach him about transphobia? Absolutely not. What this teaches you is you go to prison because this is what you do. And there's nothing about... What breaks my heart is that this is not justice. This is not... It's just reapplying the very same system that created the violence in the first place. And it really gets to me. Thoughts out to Isla Nettles right now. Another similar unfortunate story comes from Fontana, California, so my neck of the woods. Well, not the Fontana part, but California at least. And this story that I have here is actually the father of the suspected murderer. But what we have here is Jean-Pierre Powell, who was dating Dominique Newburn for many years. And Dominique Newburn, who went by, I believe, Dominique Duffy, was on a show, an online reality web series called Hollywood Houseboys. And she was a rising reality TV show. I don't know that you can really rise as a reality TV star.
Yeah, I think it should be noted that you're using air quotations.
Air quotations, right.
Around rising star.
And not to minimize my friends out there who are reality stars. I just think that... Okay, so anyways, so she was rising to stardom in some capacity, but unfortunately was recently found murdered in her home. The lead suspect being her now ex-partner, I guess, Jean-Pierre Powell. And the story that's going right now is that Jean-Pierre's father is currently pleading that he turn himself in to police. There have been no updates since that I have come across, but this is another instance of just ongoing cycles of violence with, I think, interesting pictures.
I mean, this is radio, so I think it should be noted in both of the stories that you just mentioned, the one in Harlem as well as the one here in California, the victim and those, the person who was doing the murdering, in both instances, these were black people.
Yes.
And I hate to be that guy that always harps back on, some of the underlying tensions, but I think it should be noted. I think that's really important. So this is black people that are being victimized, but it's also black people that are doing the violence, right? So within that community, as a part of activism, what can we do to change the notion of what masculinity is and what it means about sexual diversity and gender diversity within that small community? I think is really important.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, and I mean, statistically speaking as well, I mean, when we talk about who are going to be those that are going to either survive or succumb to this type of violence, it tends to be trans women of colors, overwhelmingly. And I think that's particularly because we have certain bodies that might be sticking out over others. Where kind of this, if we go back to your notion of the dynamic performance of gender, right, that kind of interactive component is going to really... it's really going to, I think, pinpoint some bodies over others. But I really like your point about how we also have the criminalization also of bodies of color, particularly black men, almost always. There was one story in the last 3 months where it was a white man, but arguably he wasn't a white man, because I think that he just had white skin, but actually wasn't white identified at all.
Right.
It was just out of the news segment. But anyways, okay, so those are those two stories. The next story we have turns us to American Apparel. Love it. Now, this connects to... All three of these next stories kind of connect each other in interesting ways, but American Apparel has put out an open call for transgender models, and it should be noted that American Apparel has had trans models in the past. Particularly, they had Isis King from America's Next Top Model as one of their models in the past. So this is something new. But what they're looking for is not just transgender models, but transgendered models as something that has happened to somebody. Some tragic past experience, I guess. You've been transgendered. With my little magical wand.
Fairy dust comes at you.
So I suppose if that's something you're interested in, you can certainly apply to be a model for trans. But I should also, for American Apparel, but I should also note that the CEO of the company, a very interesting fellow, who's had a lot of controversy, and I hate that this is considered controversy, but this is the way that it's kind of spun right now, that this is controversial, that they're looking for trans models. But some of the controversy that I would consider controversy comes from multiple lawsuits, including claims that he used one of his employees as a sex slave.
Right.
I believe there's been multiple sex slaves specifically. and also for having a policy of firing employees that are too ugly.
Who defines what's too ugly?
Apparently the CEO, just like at
Like, is there a
Abercrombie and
scale?
Fitch, too.
Like, is
1
there
to 10.
Yeah, like you're 7 on the ugly
I wonder
scale.
if we could walk in and just get that number. Maybe they scream that number when you walk in.
With a megaphone.
Yes.
Like 7.
Right.
He's not going to see you
And
today.
then you just cry.
If you're anything over a 2, you get fired.
And then also apparently an employee was released allegedly, I have to use that word allegedly in scare quotes, for undergoing chemotherapy. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. I just read this in this particular news article here. But nonetheless, American Apparel is seeking out transgender models. Now, how does this connect to other stories? Well, allow me to share an anecdotal story. So a few weeks ago, I decided to call up the Human Rights Campaign stores in San Francisco as well as in DC. And I simply wanted to know if any of their products were union made. That's all I wanted to know. Are any of your products union made? And the response was, literally. I'm not exact. This is it. Hello, are any of your products union made? I'd like to know before I purchase any of your products. For performance, to be clear. And then the response was, I don't know if they're union made, but they're made by American Apparel. And I thought, okay, that's kind of the same, but not at all. And so there's this interesting kind of history that American Apparel has with LGBT, I should say not LGBT communities, but with the Human Rights Campaign specifically. So we have an interesting connection between a questionable clothing practice here in America and California sweatshops connected to the Human Rights Campaign, a global, but specifically a national organization that is pumping tons of funds into different types of political action points, which connects us to the next story. Are you following so far? I hope the audience is following me.
I'm with you.
Which connects me to the next issue, which gets under our skin, which is Jennifer Natalia Pritzger, who is a decorated colonel, and the Hyatt Hotel heir, announces that she's trans. So this would be, at least to my knowledge, the first billionaire who's coming out as trans and actively transitioning. Right. So not just trans, but taking that kind of more or less physical transition path. And what is it? She's worth $1.5 billion.
Right, she's one of the richest people in the world.
What? That's ridiculous.
She's up there with Oprah.
She is up there with Oprah. She's like, hey, I'm going to make decisions. And she is. Right. Because we reported recently that she actually donated actually at the time, she hadn't come out yet.
And she still gave the money.
She gave the money. Right. And so it was $1.35 million was given to the Palm Center, a UCLA think tank that kind of largely helped DADT, Don't Ask, Don't Tell, Be Overturned, was granted to the Palm Center to now include trans people. And then a week or two later, she comes out as trans. And so this interesting connection between how money kind of filters and how money is very explicitly the one that's making the decisions about queer bodies being included in military structure is the same kind of money being pumped through the Human Rights Campaign and American Apparel. Okay, do you see all my connections?
I see you, and I mean, I totally get you, right? So we're talking about class and economic structures earlier, right? So at the end of the day, no matter if you're trans, black, white, we live in a society where eventually money makes the rules, and these connections of these stories kind of just harp on that even more.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's unfortunate, but I mean, we live in America. Until people wake up, that's how it's going to be.
Yeah, ain't that the truth? Well, this brings us to our last connected story that is going to certainly not only fill the rest of our time here, but also bring us to, I'm sure, further future stories. I personally have not felt comfortable noting this story about Chelsea Manning until Chelsea Manning had come out herself. Multiple channels, including the evidence on the stand during her trial, were already outing her, particularly around the trans activists that she has been in contact with over the years. In the past, when she still identified as a gay man, after she was already kind of starting to identify, I believe at the time was going by Brianna Manning, I think was the name she was using. This is, of course, in the past. But since last week, she has come out as Chelsea Manning. After her ruling or her sentencing of 35 years, hopefully she'll be out in the 7 to 8 years with good practice. Ultimately, Bradley Manning is no longer known as Bradley Manning. She is now Chelsea Manning. It's really that simple.
Right.
And part of the issue that's going around is media representation, that we always come back to this in the show here, is particularly around the ways that trans people get pushed around, bullied in the media. And so part of that is certain groups like CNN refusing to refer to her in female pronouns or as Chelsea Manning.
And then, their excuse for why they were still using male pronouns was so...
Can you please read it?
Yeah,
it's that bottom blue highlighted paragraph. This is
CNN's policy is to reference Manning with masculine pronouns since he has not yet taken any steps towards gender transition through surgery or hormone replacement therapy. And this is exactly what we were talking about earlier, right? So there's no representations of trans people that don't physically alter their body with surgeries or hormones. So it gives institutions or organizations like CNN the impression that, to be trans, one must alter their body.
Yeah.
And my problem is, if I say I am male, who are you to say I'm not, right? So if this is how I identify, who gives you the right to just completely disregard what I just told you about my own life?
Right.
On like the most common sense, simple level, it's just rude. Like,
right.
Point blank.
And part of that is that when Manning first goes on trial, way back when, right, prior to coming out as being trans, she was never questioned for her maleness at the time. It's only that now that she's come out as trans that now she has to prove it. What?
Yeah.
So it's part of that first impression thing. And it tends to also, this first impression thing, which gets admittedly under my skin. I don't know why I did that underneath my skin. I literally did that right now for those listening. The struggle that folks have with switching gender pronouns, I've never grasped how that's difficult. Mm-hmm. It's literally not part of my experience. When I hear someone that routinely uses the wrong pronouns, I think, what is the downright refusal? What's the difficulty? I can't wrap my head around it.
I guess I'm more sympathetic than maybe you are, especially when it comes to family members.
Sure.
I could probably understand how a mother might have a harder time switching pronouns. In the case of CNN, who obviously they consider themselves serious journalistic entity. I don't understand how. Neither one of us personally know Manning, right? So it's just like, on that level, how could it be difficult? Literally, you're writing a story. So it's nothing just to type the right pronoun.
Right.
So I guess in that sense, I understand where you're coming from. But on a personal level, I guess I could see. But yeah, in this sense, I don't know what the problem is. They were just trying to defend themselves, and it was not something that you can really defend.
Yeah. I don't know. I really struggle with it. It's interesting because why even have the show the split screen? And
that's another thing. So for the listeners who haven't seen the photos, which I'm sure a lot of people have, but they continuously show Manning in uniform and then Manning presenting as female. And it kind of goes back to exactly what I was talking about, this money shot, this fixation on the physical, right? So, like, we always have to let the people know, like, look, they're tricking us. This is what they're doing. This is what, is happening. They, and it turns the individual into a spectacle.
Yeah.
And that turns into ignorance, and that ignorance turns into violence. It's kind of the psychopathic.
And that's already what's happening to her. The whole thing about, she comes out as trans. Important. I support her. Great, wonderful. What ends up happening is the discussions about her being trans, and it's no longer about the fact that someone who was calling out abuse in the military and governmental structure was sentenced for saying there's abuse and military and governmental issues going on. That gets lost in the whole issue, and this is where spectacle becomes really important to understand how the trans body, whatever that body is, whoever it is, whoever's living and moving through the world in that body, it becomes about that as opposed to the fact that someone was just sentenced for blowing a whistle saying this is problematic. We are, as a country, funding the murder of all kinds of people that is completely illegal.
I think that happens with a lot of news stories. Anybody who takes like an intro to media course or a politics and media class, you spend a lot of time talking about amnesia, the American people. One instance that pops in my head is the situation in Haiti, right? So we spend all this money, and if you go back to Haiti now, people are still living in tents, and we're not talking about it. The same thing is happening with trans problems. It's unfortunate that maybe the story of the young individuals we talked about earlier, they might be a blurb, and then people just move on, and no one's talking about it. And I think as a community, it's our responsibility to keep these kind of issues in the forefront if we want people to listen to us and we want change to occur.
Yeah. That's fair.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could talk about what are your thoughts on the impact of Manning being marked as, being known now as a trans woman, in terms of young trans folks. What do you suppose this does? And I'm thinking here particularly of a trans person who comes out after she's sentenced and now will go away.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting. So it's like what happens when Manning is serving her sentence and we're not hearing about her, on a daily basis. What happens to her story then? I think it's really important for, no matter even if she is sentenced, for these things to, these people to come out, right? So going back to you can't be something you can't see. So we have to see representation of trans people, or it won't be something that we can talk about. I believe her story is inspiration to a lot of people.
Yeah.
I think anytime a gay, anybody in the LGBT community comes out, it's a big deal. I wish that it was somebody who we could have more access to on a long-term basis. It's unfortunate that that won't be the case with the sentence and everything, though.
And it's interesting because she certainly welcomes letters.
Yeah.
And I myself am going to start writing letters to her as soon as she's settled, wherever it is she's going to be settled, and trying to get correspondence with her. I'd like to get some feedback from her. Maybe you would be able to read some of that on the air as well. Right. This is also a good time for me to plug an organization that I've been a part of for a while and I've been supporting for a while, which is Black and Pink. And you can find them at blackandpink.org. And Black and Pink essentially they started as and continue to be largely a prison abolition movement, but they focus on LGBT folks in the prison industrial complex, and they have one of the largest that I know, maybe the only database of a LGBT pen pal program. Wow. So if you're interested in being pen pals with someone in prison, and you can shed some of the social conditioning that teaches you people in prison are bad, that the pen pal program is very rewarding for not you. This isn't about those who are what we might call free folks, but those who are in the system. Just giving them a sense of hope and connection to the outside world, to other queer people. And particularly the large groups of trans people that are in prison that are not allowed to identify as trans behind bars, and how you might be the only source of being able to maybe validate that for them, and really trying to connect with them. And I think that Bradley is another one of those examples of saying we're not going to, because this is where I'm getting at. When you assign the letter to Manning, you have to write Bradley Manning. You can't write Chelsea. And it's important to note that is part of I think it can create the ongoing system of dysphoria in some capacity. I would imagine.
Right.
I don't know Chelsea myself, but I would imagine that's part of that ongoing process. But to then open the letter to then see Chelsea Manning, I think is part of the reward, part of the affirmation. I mean, it's something as simple as calling somebody by the name that they want to, and how doing that or not doing that can either be rewarding or problematic. But it'll be interesting to see. I don't know. Maybe it's just my personality, but I think it'd be interesting to see if they intercept with some of these letters, and what actually gets to her and what doesn't get to her. And like I said, that could just be more my personality. That's how I think of the government. No. I don't think that. I think that's completely legit. Yeah. I mean, everything's going to be read, of course. Nothing goes unread. Right. For enters prison, of course. Any prison, I would imagine, particularly military prison. I don't know where Manning is being held. But I think that's a really good point, and that's also another one of the reasons I want to start kind of a letter correspondence, hopefully. It's just to kind of create a contact with this individual, least of which to also show support in terms of someone who I'm so going to say, who allegedly shared tons of really important information with the public, whether or not the public decides to look at it. So many people still have no idea what Manning did.
And I think that's really problematic on multiple levels as well. But in the realm of her being trans, it'll be interesting to see how she copes with whether or not I'm going to assume she's not going to have access to hormone replacement therapy if that's something that she does want. I don't know if it is. Some trans people don't want it. But the lack of access to that, I'd be really interested to see how that could potentially impact her.
Yeah, I mean,
because I don't know the laws regarding. I've heard conflicting things about access to hormone replacement therapy in prison. So
yeah, and I'm sure it's always going to differ or depend also on your location. I don't know specifically how. I mean, if we have someone like, and this is where that connection comes in, where we have Pritzger, who's giving $1.35 million to the Palm Center. If the military needs money and she's willing to give money over, I think that Manning might get her hormones.
Right, because it's all about who has power and who has connections.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And at least from what I've heard, Manning is looking to start HRT, hormone replacement therapy, as soon as possible. I don't know what that looks like in the military. I've always heard, and I could be wrong, I should really look this up, but if you're military, your benefits after service cover transition.
Really?
I believe.
That'd be really interesting to note. In regards to Don't Ask, Don't Tell, in a lot of ways, I feel like being trans is always, within the LGBT community, the last group of people to get rights, right?
Oh, yeah.
So it's like, Don't Ask, Don't Tell is overturned, but you still can't be trans in the military. So what happens when marriage equality comes around? So it's one of those things that we'll have to really see how this progresses.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to join the military, and it's something that I didn't do because of issues like this. So I'd be really interested to see how this happens and goes forward.
Yeah, absolutely. What are your thoughts on actually? Here I have an update here. Chelsea Manning will be held in a military prison, Fort Leavenworth, a max security men's prison. Thank you, Julie, for that update.
Oh, yeah, sweet.
There you go. That's how we work here. This is community.
I'm going to be in Julie's class later on this afternoon, so I'm going to give a shout out to Julie over there if she's listening.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think she's pretty rad.
So it's actually exactly what I was wondering, and apparently is going to be in a men's prison. As for HRT, I am interested in that. I'm wondering, it's something I'm going to definitely look into further. And what that access might look like for military personnel specifically, because there's going to be a different type of apparatus structure there in place for those individuals. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about what your thoughts are on the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell and the inclusion of queer bodies in the military, if you have thoughts on that at all.
I mean,
I'm not trying to egg you on.
No. I think it's one of those things where, excuse me, there are already queer bodies in the military.
Sure.
They were already there. They're going to continue to be there. It is nice to have that security behind the fact that a person can't lose their job and they can continue to serve our country. So that's always nice. I'm one of those people that I have thoughts about assimilation on many levels. So my thoughts about that kind of thing are, they vary. But anytime that you can get legal protection, that's always nice. I was having a conversation with someone about assimilation. So it's like, how do you get financial security without assimilating into white middle class society? How do you get legal rights without assimilating to hegemonic marital status? So those are some things that as a community, which there's a lot of division within the LGBT community about how do you do those things, and within the black community and other minority groups. So it's something that is complicated, that people are passionate about, that people have a lot of personal feelings about. So as someone who's only 21, I'm looking forward to seeing how these things evolve over my lifetime and my children's lifetime and that kind of thing. So.
Oh, look at this, another update. The military usually does not provide HRT. There are efforts to provide HRT to Manning.
Gotcha.
So we'll see how that kind of plays out.
Yeah. I'm interested.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think that's a really good point about kind of queer bodies are certainly already in the military. That kind of protection, that's not the reason that you get excused, particularly if someone enrolls in the military. My younger brother did so, and part of that was for the benefits, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was able to find all kinds of channels that allowed me to continue going through college as a first-generation student. And so I was able to take that route, difficult as it might be. School doesn't work for my brother, as it doesn't for a lot of people.
Right.
And so he chose military, and part of that was because the benefits would allow him a certain type of ease after service. And I'm wondering, if someone is kicked out of the military for being trans, right, this is where it becomes really crappy, that all of those benefits also just disappear.
I think, which of course I'm not like a military scholar or anything like that, I think it has to do with the type of discharge. So, whether it's honorable or dishonorable, I would assume no matter what the situation, it has a lot to do with that. It's unfortunate because hormone replacement therapy, if that's something that a trans person is interested in, that's so important for so many trans people, and to have access to that is so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, which, I mean, if anyone is looking for access, Dr. Waldyke here at the SIU Wellness Center is a great resource. I would definitely tell you to check her out. She's there on Tuesdays. Just a little plug for that.
But on that same note, you have to approach her already with prescription. Is this right?
Yeah, so the way it works is, the way the SIU's policy works is they ask that you start the process with the endocrinologist or a physician who's kind of well-versed in the matter of transition, and then they correspond back and forth with that doctor or endocrinologist just to make sure that they have the best course for you. If you have access to that initial prescription and then you come here to go to school or something like that, then you can continue it here. I know Southampton Clinic in St. Louis, they're a great LGBTQ clinic, and they do tons of work with AIDS research and prevention and care, as well as transitioning for MTFs and FTM.
So and that would be not only for students but also for our community members that don't have access to Dr. What is it?
There's multiple physicians there. Dr. Summers is there, as well as...
This is in St. Louis?
Yes, in St. Louis at Southampton. Here in the Carbondale region, the one doctor that I'm well aware of is Dr. Waldyke at the SIU Health Center.
Okay, great.
And she's there on Tuesdays.
Yeah, and that's really helpful for our listeners out there that are not students, too, because we have to always remember to pay attention to that divide there sometimes, where we make strides on campus, but off campus it can be really difficult. So, well, we've neared and come to the end of our show. I want to thank Shahan for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's been super fun.
Hopefully you'll be able to come back. I'll just bring you back sometime.
Right. And hopefully... this gets people excited and talking.
Absolutely. Thank you for tuning in to Beyond the Binary. You can catch us facebook.com/Beyond the Binary. Email us at bthebradio@gmail.com. And why don't you give your information one more time about those who want to...
So if anyone's interested in the documentary or just great conversation, or you just want to be my Facebook friend because I'm really cool, you can email...
I did.
Yeah, you can email me at shahan.bellamy@gmail.com or sIU.edu. And my first name is spelled Shahan. Bellamy is Bellam as in Mary, Y. So it's been great being here with you. I'm really excited.
I love that the first time you said your name, the M was for men, and the second time M was for Mary.
I mean, I try to keep it...
Those two things are perfect to me.
I mean, I just try to keep it, I just try to go both ways with my gender sometimes. So I wanted to include Mary and me. So.
All right, I'll see y'all later. Have a great week. Treat each other well.
Yeah, be kind, as Ellen would say.
I like that. All right, take care, everyone.